Hey, welcome back. Today we're sewing the front loader block from the Mighty construction site Quilt. This one is a great block and we've put together one of the most thorough tutorials in the series for it. So no matter where you're at with foundation paper piecing, you'll be able to follow right along. The techniques are exactly the same as every other block we've done. Add your fabric, sew, flip, trim, and repeat. Just wanted to make sure you had plenty of guidance every step of the way. Let's get into it. If you're new here, let me give you a quick rundown of how foundation paper piecing works. You're sewing fabric onto a printed paper pattern, and that paper is what makes foundation paper piecing so accurate. It does all the guesswork for you. Every section is numbered and you work through them in order. Each step follows the same sequence. You place your fabric on the back side of the paper, sew on the line, flip the fabric open, press it down, and trim your seam. That's it. Place, sew, flip, press, trim. Over and over until your section is done. Once all your sections are pieced, then the papers tear right off and you're left with a crisp, perfectly accurate block. Let's jump in. Before we start sewing, let's talk about your pattern. You'll want to print it at a 100% scale. Don't let it resize. We actually have a 1-inch box so that you can double check to make sure it's being printed correctly. A couple of the sections are bigger than a standard piece of paper, so you'll be taping pages together. We also have a taping guide where you can kind of see which pieces are supposed to go together and how. First, you'll cut your printed page right along the printer's edge line, then slide your second one on top and line up the pattern. Once it's matched up perfectly, tape it down and then cut the whole thing out on the dotted line, or cut everything out on the dotted line like you see here, and then add the pieces together. It's all personal preference. There's not a right or wrong way to do it. That's going to be your finished section, and then you are going to sew on that section. Quick tip, we always print on newsprint paper. It's lighter than regular copy paper and gentler on your needle and peels off really easy at the end. The next thing I wanted to talk about before we get into sewing is the coloring page that comes with every pattern in our shop. This is one of my favorite little extras because it makes the whole process so much smoother. The coloring page is an outline of your block, and the idea is before you ever touch your fabric, you can grab some colored pencils, map out exactly what colors you want to use, see it visually, move things around, try different combinations, no commitment required. Once you've got your color plan figured out, you take that coloring page and use it as your reference guide, go through your pattern sections and color each piece to match. So then instead of relying on your printed colors, which is what you'll get if you print in color, you'll get your own custom color map right there in front of you. That way, when you're sitting at your machine, you're never guessing which fabric comes next. You know exactly what goes where, and you can just focus on sewing. It's a small step that saves a lot of headache, especially on a more detailed block. One thing that you do want to keep in mind is that your pattern is going to be mirrored from the colored block, because the fabric is going to end up being your finished product, right? So you're going to see what the color page is, but you're going to be coloring the mirrored image. So don't get confused by that. It's by design. Alright, now that we've done all of our prep work, we've got that done and out of the way, we're going to get our add a quarter rulers. We absolutely love those because it has that little lip on the end to add a quarter. You'll see how we use that later on in this tutorial. We have linked that below, as well as the newsprint paper that we use. But we're going to start with this tire, and we're going to get our first piece of fabric, which is going to be placed pretty side down. So the pretty side is going to be on your table or facing away from the paper, making sure that it is covering the entire section all the way around. After you get that placed perfectly, you're going to want to get a pin and secure it into place so it doesn't slide around, and then you're going to get fabric for number 2. Alright, now that we have that piece of fabric, we are going to use this cool add a quarter ruler because it has a tapered edge. Find your number 2 and then fold the pattern back so that you know exactly where that line is going to be. So that line is where you're going to sew. but then we're going to trim off that extra fabric from number 1. And that's really helpful because it reduces bulk, but it's also going to give you a little bit of a guideline when it comes to pressing or placing your fabric for this next piece. You're putting pretty sides together, so the pretty sides of each fabric are facing each other. You know that this is lined up well because you just followed that line that you've created, and then you're going to make sure that when you fold that out, so fold that fabric back the way it's supposed to be, that it covers that piece entirely. Now that you know you have your piece, you're going to sew right along that line, and it is very important that you try to stay exactly on this black line of the pattern the entire time. Alright, now that you've got that sewn on there, we like to use a wool mat when we're pressing our pieces just because it is portable and easy to use. We've linked it below, but we open that up. You're going to press it, set your seam, and then we move on to the number 3. If you want to, you can trim the excess of that piece that you just did, but for simplicity's sake, we're just going to move on to the next step, or the next piece of this pattern, number 3. You're going to fold your pattern back on that line, trim that 1/4 of an inch off, give yourself a guide, and then find your next piece of fabric, making sure that it is pretty sides facing each other. You line it up along that guide that you just did, and ensure that when it is finished and flipped back, that it is covering that entire area. If you're starting to see a trend here, that's because it literally repetitive cycle: place, sew, flip, press, trim. So that's where we are going to sew along that line. We know that it is covering that entire area, and we are going to make sure that we are as accurate as possible and staying on that black line, following the pattern exactly. All right, now that we've got that sewn, we're going to pull it back, press it, set our seams, and then move on to our next one. So we've done 1, 2, and 3, so we're going to move over to 4, which is exactly the same as 2 and 3. We're going to get our piece of fabric, fold back our pattern. That'll give us an idea of where to place our fabric. And again, it's going to be pretty sides together. There we go, just making sure that that black piece of fabric is going to cover everything. So you're folding the pattern down so that you can kind of use your finger as pressure, knowing, okay, if I put it here, when I fold this up, it's going to cover that area. Yep, so we're folding it up and checking it, and sure enough, yep, we're good. So we'll go ahead and get that sewn. All right, and then we repeat again. Set our seam, fold it back, and move on to number 4. Fold our pattern back, and then we're going to trim that excess fabric there. Get our piece of fabric. Yep, that's going to cover our section. Great. Line that up. And really, because you held it over the pattern at the beginning, like if you saw that, you don't have to fold this back to make sure, but if you want to double check, then by all means, better to check twice than have to unpick everything, right? All right, so we got that sewn on there. And now we're going to move on to our next one, which is exactly the same as the last one. Fold our pattern back, trim our seam allowance there, trim our excess, give ourselves a seam allowance, make sure that our fabric choice covers our area, which it does, so we're going to line that up. And then sew that again. We're going to press that open. Then we don't have to trim that one because that just goes to the edge of the pattern, so we'll just move on to the next one. Or if you like to keep the process trim that out. By all means, go for it. Not a big deal. So we're gonna fold back this pattern, trim off the excess, grab your piece. Fits better that way. And that's going to be more than enough to cover our piece right there. So I trimmed that up, and then now we're going to line it up here. And then if you want to, if you're having a hard time keeping that fabric on there while you are sewing, you can put a pin right there to make sure it stays on there. And then you just sew along that line. Ready? I think we just did the tire. Yeah, we did all the way around, so we're gonna do the outsides of that tire and help build that shape a little bit. So we have our yellow, I kept wanting to say orange, yellow triangle here that we're gonna put on our tire. Trim the excess, line it up. I'm gonna put my finger here because I know that if from the pressure on my finger that it is covering the entire area that I need it to, and that's just one way to be able to check that without having to fold your fabric back. I sewed all the way across there from one end to the other along that seam line. I'm going to open it up, set my seams, press that, and then move on to the next one. Hold our fabric back, cut our seam allowance, cut our extra with the seam allowance. I'm going to check to see if this fabric will cover my area. If you fold that pattern down, you can see through your fabric sometimes, and that kind of gives you an idea of whether or not it's going to cover the entire area. And again, you're putting this fabric on, pretty sides facing each other. And press it, and then we move on to the next one. I'm going to fold that fabric, or that pattern back again. Trim off the extras. Put your fabric pretty sides facing each other. And then you're gonna sew along that line. Fold your fabric back, press your seams. And because there's so much extra on there, you're gonna cut a little bit. You can just cut off a little bit and use that as fabric for your next piece. That 1/4 inch ruler that we're using here is really nice for foundation paper piecing because it has like a lip on the edge, and then on the other side it has a tapered edge so that you can use that to fold your paper back, which is really handy. We've actually linked that below if you're interested. We love using that because then it also, as you're adding your 1/4 inch seam allowance, it grabs onto that paper and gives you that extra 1/4 inch. So if you are having problems with it or you would like to give it a try, we would recommend that one. It's definitely not a necessity. You can do it with any ruler that you want, and you can fold back the paper however you want, but it's pretty handy if you're going to be doing this. Alright, so we've got our fabric here. We're doing pretty sides together, and then lining that up. Sewing right across that line for the pattern. We're going to open that up, press it, and then cut along the edge of that pattern. We're not cutting off that dotted line. That dotted line is very important to keep on because as we combine these sections that we're building, we're going to use that as a guide. And we did it. We just built our first section, and it's on to the next. All right, so we start with our first fabric, which is going to be pretty side down, facing the table, and then we're going to put this pattern on there and then pin it to hold it in place. This section looks simple and easy, which it is because there's only 2 pieces, but there is strategy to getting your fabric placed correctly because the seam is on a diagonal. So we can't just line up our fabric along the edge like we have been and going for it, because when you flip it back up, you're not going to be covering your entire piece right there. So what we need to do first is fold the pattern down along the stitching line. That lets you see exactly where the fabric needs to sit underneath, and it has to cover the entire area completely with enough extra to account for your seam allowance. You'll want to lay your piece of fabric over the area right side up, and then place your pattern on top of it. Make sure it covers that whole section. Don't just eyeball it. Check all the edges and that diagonal line. Once you're happy with the placement, you'll hold it right there and don't let it slide. That diagonal can be a little sneaky. It may want to shift on you, so you'll want to be really careful about that. All right, one more time, just because this can be a little bit confusing the first time you do it, but after you get it and it clicks, it's such a game changer. So again, you're going to have your fabric right side facing up. I'm going to have this pattern laid down on top of that fabric to make sure that you're seeing it across all edges. Just like this. Okay, now you carefully fold your pattern back up into the place over the fabric. Everything should still be right where you left it. You can pin it to make sure that nothing shifts, and then you're going to sew right along the line on the pattern. Follow it exactly, and when you hold your fabric up after sewing, you can flip it over and it will cover that entire area perfectly, and that's how you know your placement was right. You're going to press it down. Look, make sure it covers the whole section just like it should. Simple and easy with a little strategy. And we can trim this seam allowance and then move on to the next section. One option is to color your pattern as you go, section by section. Totally fine. So we're going to get that colored in first based off of our coloring page here that we had, and then get our first fabric. Again, we're going to do pretty sides facing down at the table and put your pattern on top and then pin that on there, and then get number 2. Make sure that you trim that and line it up. It's a pretty small section, which makes it pretty easy to tell whether or not when you fold that fabric back, it's going to cover it. You can see there, we're set. We're just going to follow that line on the pattern. Okay, now we fold that back and press it. This is the arm of the front loader. We have this two-toned so that it doesn't disappear within the block. So that's why we're using 2 colors of yellow and helping it be more defined. So it's kind of hard to see that in here, but we are using 2 different yellows to kind of build out that arm of the front loader. All right, we're moving to number 3. We're going to lay that down, making sure you're doing pretty sides together. Double checking to make sure if we fold that out, if it's going to cover it, which it does. So we sewed that, pressed it. We're going to fold our pattern back for this next one, trim off our excess, and then again, pretty sides together. Match it up with that line that you just created by trimming your excess fabric. Double checking that it is going to cover that area you need covered, which it does. There we go. We sewed along the line, that black line on the pattern, as precisely and accurately as possible. Press your seam and then move on to the next piece. Hold that pattern back. Gives yourself that nice little guide. And then you can see here, since the pattern's flipped down, that because your fabric behind the pattern, your new fabric that you're going to add onto there, sticks out, that you know you've got that whole area covered. You're golden. And sure enough, we got that sewn out. Press that fabric, set your seams, and then trim all the way around. And you've got it. The next one. block. All right, this one we're gonna color our block again. This is the scoop of the front loader. So we've got our first piece of fabric there that we're gonna pin on there, and remember, pretty side facing down. And then we go to the next number here, number 2. Fold that back, trim off the excess, but then also create kind of a little bit of a guideline. And then this time you're going to do pretty sides facing together, so the pretty side is going to be facing up because it's going to be touching the pretty side of the other fabric. Alright, we've got that. Set our seam, press it. And we're going to go to the scoop of the front loader. When you're working with small, intricate pieces of foundation paper piecing, it has its challenges because you've got multiple seams, right? When you're working with larger pieces of fabric, the flip side of that is that you're dealing with bigger pieces, right? And you want to make sure that you can cover all of that without using tons of fabric or messing up or creating waste. So if you want to, you can color the back of your pattern like we've done here, so that when you lay that pattern on top of your piece of fabric that's pretty sides together, you'll know that it's covered entirely. Then you can pin it just like we've done here and then sew along the line, and that just ensures that your fabric's going to stay in place and it's not going to be flopping around or slipping and sliding, causing you to have to unpick and seam rip and all of that stuff. So go to the next one here, trim off our excess and use that as a guide. We know because our pattern is flipped down and our fabric is shown on all sides around that area, that you're good to go. Sew along that. And then we're going to go to the next one. I think we're on number 5 now. So we're going to trim that. Give yourself a guideline. Got your piece of fabric. And there we have it. Sew along that pattern line. Fold that pattern back. Give yourself a guide. Trim off the excess. Laying your pieces of fabric pretty sides together. You know you're set because that fabric's way bigger than that piece. We're going to do our last piece right here. There we go. We've laid them pretty sides together. We're sewing along that line. Alright, fold it back and set your seams. Now we're going to trim around the edges, clean up the block a little bit. Foundation paper piecing can seem very, very intimidating, but when you're working with blocks like this, again, once you find your groove and your rhythm, it's so easy to get into this like meditative space and get on autopilot. I find that when I do this, like, time just flies. It truly does, and that's when I know that I'm like in my happy place, is when I can sit down and just be sewing and working on a project and look up and all of a sudden, you know, hours have passed. So I hope that you find the same amount of joy that we do with being able to do foundation paper piecing. Not to mention the awesome creations that you can design with this method of piecing. So again, we're going to start with the other tire. The first piece of fabric was pretty sides facing down onto the table. Pin that onto your pattern and then move to the next one. We fold the pattern back along that line, and then you're getting your second piece of fabric lined up on that line, and then you're going to sew across, same with the pattern. This is exactly the same steps as the other tire, so I'm not going to talk you through every single one of them because I'm sure, as you have found, it's actually pretty repetitive. So I'm gonna let you go ahead and watch this one. If you need any tips or tricks or questions, then you can feel free to rewind or drop them in the comments below. We're almost in the home stretch of this section here, and I wanted to show you, if you have a big piece of fabric, this is a good strategy to be able to cut out a piece without kind of being irresponsible or wasteful with it. You'll want to put your pattern down on top of your fabric that's pretty side facing up, and then you use that back part of the fabric part that's folded down to give you an idea of, all right, this is what my section's going to look like. Then you'll cut it out and then keep it there so that, and then when you flip it back out, it'll perfectly cover your section. That's a fun little trick that you can try to use when you've got a giant piece of fabric that you don't want to cut up. And voila, we've done it. The tire is done. We've got that section. We're just gonna clean up the edges here. Hopefully you were able to follow along just fine without my commentary or hearing my voice the entire time. We're gonna move on to these next sections, which really are the easier sections comparative to what you've already done. So if you've made it through this, you're easily gonna make it through the next ones. All right, this is one of those little finicky ones here. We've got a strategy to this. We're gonna fold the pattern down along the stitching line. And if you want to, you can trace the back of the pattern so you can see it a little bit easier, or throw it on a light box. But the fabric underneath, pretty side facing up, is going to need to cover the entire area of that pattern that you folded back with enough extra to count for your seam allowance. So you lay your fabric piece down, right side up, make sure that it's covering the whole section, don't just eyeball it. Then once you're happy with the placement, fold that fabric or fold the pattern back, and make sure you keep that firm as you pin it on there and make sure it doesn't shift. Then you'll sew along that line on the pattern, follow it exactly. When you fold your fabric back up after sewing, it's going to flip over and cover that entire area perfectly. And there it is. Great job, guys. I'm telling you, this is the home stretch. We've got this. This is our last section, and it's relatively easy when it comes to angles and the lines that you're going to be following. The only tricky part is that you do have some sections that are pretty big, so be patient with yourself as you're working with this fabric, and follow along. We'll show you how we like to keep the fabric in place and keep them from slipping. But first things first, we start with number 1, pretty side facing down, pin that onto your pattern, and then do number 2. Pretty sides facing each other, press that, and then repeat. This next piece is going to be very similar. It's actually the exact same as what we've done in the past, it's just a little bit bigger. So you're going to fold your pattern down, get your fabric and put it pretty sides facing up, and make sure that that piece of fabric covers every area of the back of the pattern that's showing. Once you have that, then you're going to pin that piece of fabric in place and then sew along that black line. And then once you fold that fabric back, you're going to see that it's covered everything just the way it needs to be. Just in case you didn't catch that, we put pins on the edge of that pattern so that the fabric isn't, moving around and flapping around on us because this is another big piece. This is easy though because it's straight, it's pretty self-explanatory. You're gonna put that piece of paper down, pretty side facing up, and then you're gonna put your fabric and pattern on top of it so that you can sew along that line. And there we have it. We've done it. This is the last section that we're going to build, and now all we have to do is the assembly. So we're going to clean up these lines and then we will move on to building our front loader, and this is when the magic really happens. It's nice to have our assembly guide that's included in each pattern with you as you're doing the assembly. So if you don't have that, it's nice to pull that out. But first we're going to start by pinning the two corners. I like to put the pin in the very top corner of one section and then push that through to the other section, make sure those line up, and then put those clips along the edge to make sure that nothing slips as you're sewing. And then you'll have all of those connected. Alright, so we've got our first one there. And you'll see that we like to take out the paper that we just sewed across and then press the seams open. That's personal preference. You don't have to do that right now. We just find that it helps reduce bulk. So we're going to get our next two sections and put those together. And again, we put the pin in the corner and then set that with some clips and then move along the edges, just watching to make sure that everything's lining up and it looks like it should. Again, we just tear off the paper that has now turned into seam allowance now that we've connected those. And then we are going to move on to this next section connection. This one you have to be really careful with because you do have a line that needs to be continuous. So what we can do is you can either clip it or pin it in that specific area, making sure that that line looks continuous. And sometimes we'll even sew a little bit right there on that section and open it up and make sure that that line actually is continuous and that we like it. If it's good, then great, we can just continue clipping like we did here. If it's not good, then all you have to do is open up that one section. This one is a very important part and something that you want to make sure you're aware of when you're connecting sections, because again, that's the difference between whether or not it is a clean image or it looks broken up and choppy. This one also has the same thing, so I slowed this down a little bit so you can watch that. You just put those sections together and then you're going to push that pin through and then match that up on the other side, that connecting side, because you know those are the intersections that you want to make sure are matched up perfectly. And then you're going to put some clips again to set that, make sure it's not slipping around, and then just put a few stitches in there to make sure that it's in place. And that was not on. That was not where we needed it to be. So we opened up the stitches, ripped those open, and then tried again. And that's much better. All right, now we are going overboard on the clips because again, this is the most important part. We don't want to rush it. You want to take your time to get those connected, and following that assembly guide along with this video is going to ensure your success. Okay, we've got those connected. We've just got one more piece on the bottom, and then we will connect the bottom half and the top half. So this one does not have any continuing lines, so this one's a pretty easy one to put on there. You'll just put your pins in your corners to make sure that you've got them together and spaced evenly, and then put clips along the edge there, and then sew along that line. And there we have it. Got the bottom half of the front loader done. Alright, so now we just have to connect the top and bottom. The nice thing about this one is there are no continuous lines, meaning we don't have to connect any intersections. So the trickiest part is the fact that they're two big sections. So you'll just want to make sure you can try to control your fabric. Again, putting the pins in the corners and then clipping from the inside out is very helpful. And then you just sew along that line. And there we've got it, the front loader. And that's your front loader block. I really tried to make this one of the most thorough tutorials in the series, so we hope it felt manageable every step of the way. This is one of 9 blocks in the Mighty Construction Site Quilt. If you are working through the full series, you're making great progress. But one quick note, if you're using the full construction site bundle patterns, you may notice a few extra numbers or an additional section compared to what you see here. Don't worry, the process is exactly the same, it's just a couple more steps. As always, add your fabric, sew, flip, trim, and repeat. Make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss the next block, and until then, happy sewing.